I know, I love it. I'm dancing too. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Melody McAllister, and I'm the host of the Growth Over Grades podcast, where we talk about education ideas and topics that matter most to our Spaces educator community. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Mr. Todd Scholl. Todd is an educator and advocate for our schools and teacher wellness. I've been following him for a while on social media, and I admire his passion in which he shares. His messages keep the whole person in mind, whether that's students or teachers. And when he posted this quote last month that I'm just about to read, I was like, I've got to get him on this podcast. He said last month, standardized testing is a waste of taxpayer money. It is no longer needed. More authentic and useful assessment of student performance can be done by individual teachers in schools. This would save money and dramatically improve school culture. So I want to get back to that quote because that's kind of what made me reach out to Todd and ask him to come on today. But Todd, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background before we get into that wonderful topic of assessment?
Sure. Hi, Melody, and everybody watching. It's an honor to be on the show and to share some ideas with you and just learn, continue to grow. I'm a 27-year public education veteran, the grandson of a public educator, son of two public educators. I spent over 15 years in the classroom here in Horry County, which is, if anybody's familiar with Myrtle Beach, I live in Myrtle Beach, South
Nice.
Carolina. Yeah, I live about a mile from the coast. It's beautiful here. There's some work we need to do culturally, but it's a beautiful place to live, great weather. And then I went to work for about 10 years for a state agency that works to recruit and retain teachers in the state of South Carolina for public schools. I did that for close to 10 years, communications, technology, and program development work. And now I just finished a fellowship with NEA and the South Carolina Education Association. I was one of 12 teaching fellows from around the country. And through that fellowship was able to develop the Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. And I'll be the lead learner there moving forward and continuing to develop that center.
I love that. And you call it cool.
Yes, it's cool. Be Cool is the Facebook and Twitter thing. So it's just facebook.com/becool, twitter.com/becool.
Yeah, that's such a cool, okay, I'm sorry. Okay. That's so cool. I love that. And so when we talk about assessment, and I know that you are very passionate about like the wellness of educators and students. And I love that quote that you said last year. So I just want to know though, before we talk about kind of the negative things about testing, what are actual ways of assessment that are the most effective in helping students and teachers grow? Is there anything good that we can talk about first?
Sure. I think anything that aligns naturally with a human being's sense of curiosity. So I think we get too rigid. So anything that's not rigid, that's flexible, that allows human beings to learn the way human beings naturally learn. And there are some schools that are doing things like that have more authentic forms of assessment, that take kids outdoors, that allow them to sort of direct their own learning. So assessment really follows how we structure the way students learn. So the more natural assessment is, the less sort of structured, rigid, and also sort of like coming from down on high and serving as a punitive model. I think of it more like the way doctors assess patients. So the doctor will say, let's do a checkup. Let's check your heart. We'll look in your ears, your nose, your throat. We'll do the blood pressure. Maybe we'll check your cholesterol. They're going to do all this diagnostic sort of assessment and then figure out what does my patient need, and then address those needs. And if the patient's well, the patient has some freedom and flexibility about how they move in their lives. Certainly there's tips for good health that a good doctor will give, but I think the whole assessment system, and we'll get to that later, is just kind of grown into this monster that isn't really aligned with humanity. So anything that teachers can do that is sort of allows young people to live a childhood and to naturally tap into their natural curiosity. Make it like that where they don't even notice the assessment, where you're just kind of watching them and seeing how they what they're learning. The other thing I'll say is this: one of the problems that we have, I think, with a lot of students is we give them an assignment to do, and they spend hours and hours doing this assignment, turning it into one person. The one person gives that assignment a grade, whether it's a paper or project or whatever, and then gives that grade back. We need to be thinking about how to create assignments where students are creating content, not just for one person to absorb, but for maybe the whole community or for the state or the world. So think about how can students create things, whether it's blog posts, videos, podcasts, things of that nature that they can share not only with the teacher, but with the world at large. And then when they get feedback from the world, it's powerful, it's meaningful. And one example I'll give is my students and I created this 4-minute video about how we wanted to transform education. And we put it on YouTube. We didn't know what would happen. Well, it took off. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I get a letter from Turkey, from Istanbul, Turkey. And they say, we're having an international education conference. And for the keynote to kick off our conference, we want to show your video. Can we have permission to do that? I went to my students, I read them the letter. And I said, are you guys good with that? You want to let them do that? And they're like, yeah, that's awesome. So then they videotaped their video shown at this international conference. And then what happens the next time I give an assignment to those students? They're not only motivated by the grade, they're motivated because they can change the world. They can have an impact on the world around them. And when you empower kids with that, assessment just becomes natural because they want to do good. They want to do good work in that when they're creating content like that.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and especially getting away from punitive, assessment. But yeah, looking at what students needs, helping them get there, and then I love that sharing with the world and helping them to see that they are a part of the world already. They don't have to wait till they graduate or hit a certain age. Like what they do matters right now. Totally resonates. When you are in a system where that is not happening or that's not appreciated, how does that make you feel? Not only as not really the student, but as a teacher?
I think most teachers are feeling that now. And we kind of all know the story going back to A Nation at Risk and then the accountability movement that grew out of that. And then it was put on steroids with No Child Left Behind, we thought, and then Race to the Top, and all of these programs that were designed with these strings attached in terms of assessment. And what's happened is, imagine going to the doctor and the doctor gives you a cholesterol screening and your cholesterol's not in a good place, and then you punish the doctor.
Right.
So we wouldn't do that. That would be silly to punish the doctor. If the doctor's telling you, hey, well, you need to eat this, you need to exercise, you need maybe take this statin, maybe do this therapy, whatever. If you don't do that, it's not the doctor's fault. Right. But the doctors in our system, the doctor would be the one who gets punished. What I would say is that certainly there are educators out there not doing a great job. We need to train them, get them the resources they need to be better equipped to lead classrooms. But most teachers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they're living under the shadow of this assessment, this accountability monster that was created, where it became the tail that wags the dog. The assessments became the thing that we've got to warp the entire curriculum, the entire school day around performing on these tests. And that's not what they were intended to do. And it's not natural. And it's become an unnatural, unhealthy, unsustainable system where we punish teachers, schools, and districts and states by these arbitrary standards that people have made. And then the worst thing is we rob children of their childhood to meet these adult goals, and we're not in alignment with their humanity, with their neurological systems. We're not in alignment with that, and it is absolutely damaging to students, and we have a moral obligation to push back against it.
Yeah, I felt at the end of my public school teaching, I felt like almost everything I was doing was pushback, and it takes a toll on you because you often don't feel supported by a lot of people in your school community, and it's nothing against them. Everybody's trying to do what they're trying to do, but you do feel like it takes a toll on you emotionally when you feel like it's I took all these child development courses to teach kids how to learn. Everything I was doing in school was against that. And I knew that. I knew that as a 20-something-year-old teaching. I knew that as an almost 40-year-old teacher. So, and I love that you said, like, over the years, I found this article and I'm just dropping it into the comments, but it was written over 20 years ago talking about the dangers of high stakes testing. And here we are. Change is so slow. And I'm just curious, like, is there ever, like, is high stakes testing ever necessary?
The I will, even if we give people the benefit of the doubt and say that the intention behind it was good, the intention was to ensure that there was a way to standardize, to see where students everywhere were performing and to try to pressure places where they were underperforming to make some changes. I mean, let's just say that that was the intention. The problem is that it went from being a diagnostic tool to seeing where children may be behind and then matching up resources to help students move forward. It went from that to being this punishment system. And then the schools completely modified everything to make testing really a god. I mean, testing is the god that we worship in schools every day because everything else we pay lip service to. So I talk a lot about people's humanity. So educators and students are human beings first. Their social, emotional needs are primary. Their mental and physical wellness needs are primary. But that's not the way it's weighted, the way we evaluate schools. It is how they perform on these tests. And because we've put such emphasis on the tests, we've actually are dehumanizing the system of public education and the human beings inside of it. We see them as data points. We see them as test preparers, test takers, and then their humanity is secondary. We need to reverse that. The humanity of the people in the building needs to be primary, and the testing is just a part of an informative part of what we're doing.
Right. And I love that you said that because it really is all about humanity. Our focus in education, you can't get away from that. That's why it's so easy to get burned out. That's why everybody needs so much support, and it just trickles down from the top to the bottom. I love everything that you're saying. And what do you think to the people who said, well, high stakes testing prepares kids for real life? Do you think that's a fair argument?
I think this gets to a really deep conversation about what our values are. What do we want real life to be? If real life is a quest for material success, a quest for chasing after money and chasing after power and status, yeah, maybe. If the ultimate goal is to produce young people who are well adjusted, who are mentally and physically well, who have social skills, who are kind to each other, who show compassion to one another, yeah, I don't think the system's built to produce that because it doesn't value that in the metrics they use for success. And so until we get the metrics right, everything else that we talk about in education is just a symptom of an underlying problem. And that underlying problem is that testing is the god, and what needs to be the primary thing that we focus on is the inner lives of young people. And sure, having a career, being able to take care of yourself, being responsible, all of those things are important. All the basic skills are important. But I would ask people to consider, what good is it if my son, who mastered AP calculus and AP English and gets straight A's, if he's riddled with anxiety and depression, if he's physically unwell, what does any of that matter? So let's get the first things first. Let's make the primary aspects of human flourishing be the focus. And then everything else kind of comes along with that. And just, we're in a race. We put ourselves in this race and this rush and this comparison with other states and comparison with other countries through PISA score and all that stuff. And it's like, why are we doing that? We just take it for granted that that's the game that we're supposed to play. And nobody questions the game. They only question, how do we play it better?
Yeah.
And we have to start questioning the game, because what we're doing is we're building human misery in the way the systems are set up. And we have kids who are graduating and they have these basic skills, but they're not mentally well. The kids are not okay. And that it's a moral imperative for us to challenge this paradigm, to change it, and to make it more human-centered.
And I mean, everything that you're saying, I do feel like you're taking us all to church right now. But here's the thing, like if parents knew what it was like inside of a room where we're testing students at the end of the year, or maybe, gosh, the longer I taught, the more tests that we did throughout the year. So it wasn't just the standardized test at the end, but how we strip our rooms, how they can't see or use any of the resources that they had all year. It's literally what they can retain and remember. I've been in trouble spelling of wrong just because in some moments you just get really stressed.
Yeah.
So it's just, I remember thinking as an administrator of tests, just like how awful it feels, how miserable when you talk about like the misery, and demoralization, like the testing, the way that we test is so scary. And then we tell teachers that if we break any of the rules, our certification is going to be yanked, or worse, we could be prosecuted. It's just, I'm glad we're touching on this, because the reality can be really frightening and we don't talk about some of those details. And right now I'm not, employed by a public school. So I don't have that. I can talk about it. I can talk about it openly and freely without feeling like I'm going to suffer consequences for saying something about it. So, thank you for going into that. And something I know that you're good at, maybe it weighed heavily on because it really is a lot of work, or maybe it's not as much work. Maybe you have insight, but what can we do, like in our own ecosystem? What can we do to actually do those diagnostic tests that you're saying that are more healthy?
So this gets into where I have to kind of veer off. I know the intention of your question, but we have to dig deep into when you say what can educators do within their own system. So that you can read that as just take the system as it is and do what you can within it. I'm saying they have to overthrow the system. I'm saying that they have to become advocates for their profession enough and care enough that they collectively say, no, this system doesn't work for kids. It doesn't work for us. We know, because we're the experts. We're the ones that you referred to going to school. We learned Piaget, Vygotsky. We learned this stuff. You didn't. We're the experts. It's like we're the doctors, right? Mm-hmm. If we went into a doctor's office and says, you don't know what you're talking about by me taking that statin or me exercising or eating, whatever. The doctors say, like, I'm the one who went to medical school. I'm telling you, you need to do this, this, and this. Now you can question that, and if you don't do it, but it's their system. Like, we have to take ownership of our system. And the problem is we've allowed politicians and policymakers and think tanks and all kinds of nonsense purveyors of, transforming education. We've allowed them to dictate our profession and to create, and we modified the system around what they told us we had to do. And we all know, and what's crazy is this isn't a conservative or liberal thing. Every educator I know knows the system is messed up. This is not a good system. So what can they do with their own system? Rebel collectively. You can't do it alone. You can't be the only rebel in your school. You got to get together and you got to say, we are not doing this anymore. Here's what we're going to do instead. And they've got to push back. And that requires courage and bravery. It requires connecting, whether it's through a state association, a union, whatever you need to do, get together and push back. Don't be silent on these issues, because it is when it's wrong and you remain silent because you're scared. I understand it. I sympathize with that. But you got to find the courage to challenge that system, because even if that was like, for me, sometimes it's like closing your door and doing what the hell you want to do anyway. And if you get in trouble, you get in trouble, but I'm going to do what's right by my students. I didn't always ask permission to do these kind of projects. So when we first started, they were blocking YouTube, blocking Facebook. And I said, my kids have to know about this stuff. So I would bring in my phone as a hotspot and get around it and do all kinds. You got to rebel. You've got to rebel against a system. And so work the best you can, do what you know is right for kids in your classrooms, make the assessments as authentic as possible, like I said earlier, try to build the assessment in ways where they're not just producing stuff for you, but producing stuff for the world, producing stuff for their community. Get them involved in service projects, get them outside of the classroom, and give them a rubric that they can help co-create, and just be authentic with them. Don't if a benchmark says you have to be at XYZ at this date and that's not what your kids need, just ignore it. And tell everybody in the department, we're going to ignore that. We're going to do it. My kids get really into, Anne Frank or whatever. And it says, well, I've got to be moving on to the next thing. But my kids are passionate about it and learning and going deeper. Screw it. I'm going to stay with that. I'm not going to follow some benchmark, because that's not what kids need. It's not in line with brain science. It's not in line with what's correct for young people. And you're sacrificing, and you're telling them that your curiosity and what you want to learn doesn't matter. What matters is what these other people say matters. And that is killing kids in terms of their capacity to want to learn. And it's why kids hate school almost universally, because they're told what you're curious about, what you naturally want to learn, is irrelevant. And we've got to reignite that. We've got to tap into kids and to ask them, what do you want to learn? What are you curious about? What you want to inquire about? And then I'll match you up with resources to figure that out and find it out. And then just trust that they're going to end up in a good place, because let's be honest about it. All of us who went to high school, how many of you remember what you learned in your chemistry class? How many of you remember what you learned in Algebra 2? If you're not using that every day, how much? So we act like it's this precious thing that they have to do. If kids need to learn Algebra 2 or chemistry, they're going to learn it if they are interested in it. And if not, they're going to memorize it for that year, spit it out in the final exam, and then forget about it 2 or 3 months later. So why do we do this to kids?
Yeah.
We're crushing their spirits. And then the teachers have discipline problems because the kids have crushed spirits, and they're trying to pull them into doing something that they don't want to do. And that's the whole problem with education is someone said the children start as a question mark and end as a period. We got to keep them as question marks throughout their whole time, and they'll naturally get to where they need to be. And actually they'll get further along if we just kind of get out of their way.
I totally agree. I love Rochelle says students absolutely need opportunities to explore what they are curious about. And I think curiosity is so lost. I've homeschooled for the last 3 years through the pandemic, a little bit before the pandemic and through it. And all I really cared about was for my children to be curious and to know how to feed that curiosity and how to put it into something like that mattered. That's all I really wanted them to do. Because just like you said, I mean, I was the crammer of testers. I would do everything, memorize everything, do the test, pass it, and then I could not remember anything a week later. Right. And I hated chemistry, just so you know.
Yes, I did too. I don't need to throw math and science under the bus. They're very important, very, very important. So I don't want to.
Agreed. And some people, that's their life, like they're just, they go towards that. And that's wonderful. We need everybody and their strengths and their talents. That was not mine. And sometimes it's presented in the way of just, memorize all this, do this equation, and that's all. There's no joy or love in it. So why would I care about, why would it matter to me? So I love that you're saying that. And when we think about it, like long term, when the students are always going to remember those times, like maybe you had them in the 5th grade. I don't know, what year were you teaching your students when they did that YouTube video?
It was probably 2008,
9. But how old were they?
Oh, they were high school students, so anywhere from freshmen to probably juniors in the journalism class.
I love that. And so the real lesson there is that they can do something that impacts others. Right. That's the learning that they're going to remember. And how do we assess that? How do we make sure that that's what's being focused on and what truly matters in our school. Can we assess that? And how can we make that the priority is what I'm thinking right now,
Absolutely. I don't know. I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but somebody said something like, if you want people to be passionate about sailing, you don't teach them how to build a boat. You teach them to have a yearning for the sea, to see the ocean, something like that. And that's where we don't trust teachers, and we don't trust kids. We don't trust teachers to teach, and we don't trust kids to learn. And so we create these boxes and these prescriptive models and these prescriptive curricula for educators to follow, because there's just no trust. And the problem with that is it's antithetical to how humans learn and want to grow.
Right.
I think about, like, I've learned more science since I left school, and this is no offense to my science teachers, but it was just the way it was presented. It didn't make me curious about it.
Right.
And when I left, I started listening to all kinds of podcasts about quantum physics and consciousness and neuroscience. And I got really interested in it, and I've learned it myself. If they had just presented it that way in school, I would have learned so much. But we just don't. That's just, think about how, like, everybody's watching this. Think about how you learn right now naturally. Like, you get geeked up about something, you hear about, like, maybe a new type of cooking or a new type of artwork or scientific discovery, and then you listen to podcasts and you read books and you check it out for a couple of weeks, and then you move on to the next thing, because that you get a little bit tired of reading about the same thing, and you move on to the next thing. And that's how we learn and grow naturally. Students will do that. Young people will do that, but they won't do it when you force them into these boxes that they don't want to be in. And that doesn't mean that sometimes kids don't need a push, that we don't need to kind of nudge them in the right direction, that there aren't some basic skills we got to ensure that all kids have. Of course. But too much of this, of children, too much of their childhood is absolutely stolen from them to meet the arbitrary goals of adults who are trying to do the right thing, but they're trying to do the right thing because they're in a system that's just broken and just not constructed to really maximize human flourishing. It's designed to meet the needs of the powerful. I mean,
right.
they
policymakers.
They need, and people need workers to fulfill these particular roles in the economy. And so when you think about, like, college and career ready, all this vernacular that we use is basically, we've got to make sure we have enough people to fill jobs. Well, that is one role, but it shouldn't be the primary role, because that's when you make that the primary role, you sacrifice the humanity of the people there.
Do you see a lot of leaders, like in your area, or when you travel and do the work that you're doing? Do you see people rebelling and coming together, leaders coming together?
South Carolina, unfortunately, does not have a lot of rebels. I mean, I know that's kind of a reputation from the 1800s, but there's not a lot of rebels. There are some. We've had some folks rise up over the past couple of years because there's been stagnant wages, deteriorating working conditions for teachers, and we've seen some organic grassroots movements and some brave people standing up for the profession. But overall, people are living in fear and will acquiesce to authority because they're scared. And that's because one of the reasons, and I'm not going to get too political, but one of the reasons is because we're in a right to work state. We do have a teachers union, but it is not able. It's not because we can't. They can be part of the NEA, which is the national union, but the state is an association because it's a right to work state. So and honestly, just teachers are scared in this state. They're scared of reprisals because that does happen when one teacher does stick their neck out and starts to rebel against the system in whatever way. They're told, you're not being a team player. They're moved. They're reassigned some other way. There's some type of punishment associated with standing up for yourself.
Right.
And sometimes that punishment comes from other educators in the form of judgment and saying, you're not being a team player. Why are you complaining? Stop whining. Just suck it up, buttercup, and do it. Right. And that's really unfortunate. We've got to change that mindset with educators.
Yeah. Okay. I've seen it all. Like we've definitely seen this. And I also just want to say before I ask you, because we're getting closer to our time, actually, we're going to go over our time, which is fine because this is a great discussion. But when we do stick our necks out, we oftentimes are ostracized, even if we're not punished. I mean, there's a punishment that isn't necessarily like from, I mean, you know what I mean? It's within
Yeah.
our own circles, and that's real. And I just want to say that the assessment, um, it doesn't have to be on paper. And I think sometimes we get trapped when you're
Mhm.
talking about your students doing amazing things that are empowering others in their community and internationally. Like, and I kind of led you into that. I wanted to, because when we think of assessment, we often think of paper and pencil, but like that was the assessment. They did it. They knocked it out of the ballpark. And can we see things like that? And when we look at teachers who are doing meaningful work
Mhm.
and their students are growing, even if the scores don't necessarily correlate, like the actual standardized scores, but
Right.
their students are doing amazing things. Like I think this is all part of growing into assessment that really matters. And like you were saying, diagnostic.
Yeah, so and we should do that. We should separate. We should say there's a time for diagnostic assessment where we've got to figure out where kids are so that we can then figure out where what they need.
Yeah.
But then let's make sure that the primary form of assessment is that we're making students endure is authentic and meaningful and relevant to them. That they see the connection in
Yes.
why am I doing this? Oh, I'm doing this because, and they can clearly answer that. It's not just for a grade. And
Right.
that's what we've got to get away from the idea that students are chasing grades and that the whole relationship is transactional about grades. It should be about finding meaning in the work, finding meaning, serving their community, learning from each other. Like I had kids do presentations and go give those presentations to other classes, and then have those classes come and do presentations for your class, and then give feedback to each other. Like, do those kind of things. And the thing is, we've got the technology. We've got Spaces, we've got Zoom, we've got all these different technologies where you can do this with classrooms around the world. You don't have to just do it in your community. Your kids can connect with other classrooms and other cultures. And so we can really create global citizens by utilizing and freeing them up to use these technologies. We would have connections with classrooms in Thailand and all around the world, and that's when the kid like is excited to come to school and they see relevance and they're interested. Tap into that and trust
Yes.
trust the process.
And I will say that actually, when I first started teaching, the technology that I had was literally the VCR on a television on the what do you call that? You visualize it. The
AV
cart,
cart, yeah.
yeah, the cart that you move. That was my technology, and the
Yeah.
actual. I can't even find my words, but the projector,
Overhead,
the old school projector. That was
yeah,
my. When
with
I
the
came back after a few years of, I had a few kids. I literally had a few kids, and then I went back into teaching. Technology had advanced so much, and it made me a global teacher, which helped me to help my students become global thinkers. And that changed me and how I think politically. It changed me how I think learning, like and to be a little bit more rebellious. It absolutely helped me to be that. So everything that you're saying is so true. When we're bringing that into our students, it not only changes them, it changes us. It makes us all better. And so I think that's why assessment matters.
Absolutely. And expanding on the concept of literacy,
Right.
I think it's just as important in 2022 that a student know how to create a video or a podcast, or as it is that they're able to write a paper. I really do.
Agreed.
I think there are multiple ways to communicate, and kids nowadays, that's how they're consuming and that's how they're communicating, is through video, audio content. So let them
Agreed.
become literate at that.
Yes. And you've shared quite a bit of wisdom, but as we come to a close, is there any other wisdom? And it can be with assessment, or it could just be like all your years, because you were in the classroom for a long time and now you're this advocate for teacher wellness and students and just for humanity as a whole. What is some wisdom you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
The teaching profession is under attack. There are a lot of unfair attacks, a lot of charges of indoctrinating kids, of grooming kids, of teaching critical race theory, things of that nature. And it's really hard right now to be a teacher. And having gone through the pandemic and having to go to virtual and hybrids and all the controversy around it and all the politics, and seeing sadly the violence that happens in our public schools, once is too often, but it's happening so regularly. It's our profession is really struggling right now. And I would just say to every teacher out there that what you do matters, and that I know that it's hard right now. And I don't blame you if you're thinking about quitting or if you're just really stressed out. I love you. I care about you. And I just want you to know, affirm that what you do matters, and you're in a position to change lives, and that our profession should be protected. We've got to push back against these narratives. Don't be afraid to use your voice and to challenge these narratives. We can challenge ideas without being mean, without being calling people names. But we absolutely can't stay silent on the issues that matter. And if you'd like to learn more about what I'm doing to foster that, you can go to cool. That's cool.us, CEWL.us. And there we have a lot of resources on everything from like mindfulness and trauma informed practices to, like, tonight we're doing at 7:00 a whole conversation about what critical race theory is, and the intersectionality of race and gender issues and all that. So I would invite you to join us tonight for that. But these are conversations we need to have, and we can't shy away from as educators. We sometimes want to just close our doors and teach, and I get that. But we've got, unfortunately, we've got forces that are working against our profession that have to be challenged, and we've got to summon the courage and energy to challenge them, to protect our public schools, because America needs teachers. Our kids, great teachers. You're the number one factor in a child's education is the teacher. And so I love you. What you do is important. And any way I can support you, please reach out to me.
I love that. I'm going to flash also just how people can follow you. You are really strong on Facebook, so make sure to follow him. I enjoy learning from you always. I'm so grateful that you came on today. This is a wonderful conversation, and just like you said, we need to be having these important conversations. We need to make sure that we feel empowered, so that when people come and make these crazy claims, that we feel very strong in what we believe and what we know is real, so that people cannot gaslight educators anymore. So I hope that you will, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to put this up. If you want to also go to Cool, did I say that right?
Yes, cool. Just cool.
Yes.
Like cool beans.
Oh, and then I also, where did I lose that? It's
cool.
CEW. Yeah.
This.us. And
Yes.
I would love to talk to anybody out there who wants to chat. I work with people all over the country, and love to talk with you. And thank you, Melody, for having me and having this conversation. It's an honor to be asked, and I appreciate all of your thoughts and your great questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere, okay? We'll talk right after this. But everybody who's watching this live or the replay, we appreciate you so much. Please join our Facebook community, our SpacesEDU community. We talk about issues like this, and we want to, collectively, we are greater than just trying to do this by ourselves. So please join our community. Thank you so much. Todd, it's been an honor and a pleasure. And we'll see you again next time, everybody. Goodbye.